After I die, will you be happy? A dramatic narrative, narrated in the first person by Margot Renault. Part 1. The Last Call. The last thing I said to my brother before I died was Happy New Year. I had so many other things to say. My body had been broken for 3 days, and I was lying in the snow on the slope of the mountain above Chamonix, and the cold had stopped hurting, which I understood from somewhere deep in what remained of my functioning mind to mean that the cold was past the stage of hurting. I had my phone. The screen was cracked from the fall, but it was working, and I held it with hands that I could no longer feel. And I called the number I had been calling my entire life when things were wrong. He answered on the second ring. His name is Etienne Renault. He is 31 years old. He is the best forensic pathologist in the Lyon office of the National Gendarmerie. He is the person who speaks for the dead, who takes what is left of a human being and reads from it the truth of what happened. He has given voice to hundreds of people who could no longer speak for themselves. He has never spoken for me. When he answered, I tried to say everything. I had rehearsed a version of it, or my mind had done something that approximated rehearsal in the 3 days since I had understood that I was not going to find my way off this mountain alive. I had thought about what I wanted him to know, about the years of it, about the ways I had tried, about the specific form of love I had for him that had no adequate language, because it had been formed before I had language and had remained constant through all the versions of him, the brother who had pushed me away with both hands, and the brother I had loved anyway. I opened my mouth. He said before I could speak, "When you die is when I'll finally be happy." He said it in the tone he used for me. The specific tone that was not angry, not heated, not performing hatred. The flat, calm, considered tone of someone stating a position they have held for a long time and see no reason to soften. I closed my mouth. I looked at the snow. The alpine sky above me was completely clear. The specific clarity of a winter night at altitude, the stars sharper than they are anywhere lower. My vision was going at the edges. The white and the red in my peripheral field made a specific pattern that I had the detached clarity to find almost beautiful. I said, "Happy New Year." He hung up. I lay in the snow on the mountain above Chamonix, and I watched the stars, and I thought about my brother, and then I stopped thinking about anything. Part 2, the in-between. I do not know how to describe what came after the mountain. There is no language for the specific state of being dead and not yet gone, the in-between that I found myself in with no preparation and no map. What I can tell you is what it felt like, and it felt like standing in a room full of people who cannot see you, who move through you and around you, and whose lives continue with the complete indifference of things that are alive to things that are not. I was in Lyon. I understand this now, though I did not understand it immediately. I was in Lyon, and I was near my brother, and I could not leave, which was either the specific mechanics of whatever state I was in, or the specific mechanics of what I felt about him. And the distinction between those two explanations does not matter very much. The office where Etienne worked was in a low grey building on the Rue de Guerlain near the river, the kind of institutional building that has never been anything other than what it is, and makes no pretense of being otherwise. The examination rooms were in the basement. The overhead lights were the specific fluorescent quality of a space that does not need to be comfortable, only functional. The smell of a pathology lab is something that the living enter and register, and then over time learn to be in without registering. My brother had learned to be in it without registering. He moved through it with the focused efficiency of someone for whom this space was simply the space of his work. I watched him work for a long time before I understood what he was working on. The case files were on the table beside the examination surface. 7 victims, 7 cases over 18 months, all connected the work of someone who had been systematic and patient and careful about leaving no identifiable trace. Etienne was the lead forensic pathologist. He had been assigned to the case because he was, as I have said, the best. The seventh victim was brought in during the second week after my death. I watched the technicians handle the material with the specific professional care of people who have been trained to treat evidence as evidence regardless of what the evidence once was. I understood what I was looking at. I understood with the specific quality of understanding that arrives when you have been denying something for as long as the denial is sustainable, and the denial is no longer sustainable. The seventh victim was me. Part 3, who we were. I want to tell you about the years before the mountain, because the mountain can only be understood in the context of the years, and the years are the real story. My name is Margot Renault. I was 23 years old. I grew up in a house in the 11th arrondissement of Lyon, in the same house where my parents had lived since before they were married, a narrow 3-story house with a garden at the back that my mother had kept with the focused attention of someone who understood that small green things needed careful tending. My parents died when I was 8 and Etienne was 16. This is where everything begins, the way things always begin, with deaths that arrive before their time. They died on the mountain in the Chartreuse Massif on a hiking weekend in September. They went looking for me. I had been gone for 4 hours up a path that was too difficult for an 8-year-old, because I had been curious and impulsive in the specific way of an 8-year-old who does not yet understand what mountains cost. A rock slide. My parents were on the lower section of the path when it came. They had been descending toward me because someone had told them I had taken the upper path, and they were moving quickly because they were frightened. I was fine. I had been sitting on a flat rock beside the path, eating the sandwich I had packed completely unaware of anything except the view, which I had decided was worth the climb. I heard the sound. I did not understand what it meant. I came down the path and found what I found. Etienne was at the base of the mountain, waiting. The rescue team had been called. When I came down the path, he was standing with the rescue coordinator, and when he saw me alive, he went white, in the way that people go white, when the worst thing has been prepared for and the worst thing has arrived and the body responds to it before the mind does. He looked at me. I ran to him, and he held me, and I cried into his jacket. And he did not cry because he was 16, and he had already decided in those hours of not knowing who he was going to have to be. That was the last time he held me. I did not understand for years the specific nature of what had happened in him. I understood that he was different after. I understood that his patience with me, which had been the patient love of a much older sibling for a much younger one, had been replaced by something else. A distance that was, at first, simply grief, then became something more specific and more deliberate. What I understood later when I was old enough to understand it was this. Etienne had been 16 and waiting at the base of the mountain, and he had spent 4 hours believing I was dead, and grieving his parents, and being the person who had to manage the situation. The notifications, the coordination, the practical collapse of a family in a single afternoon. And then I had appeared on the path, alive and eating my sandwich, and the grief for his parents, and the relief that I was alive had done something to his internal accounting that produced in the years that followed a specific and terrible result. He had needed someone to blame. I was there. I was the reason they had gone looking. I was the reason for the rock slide, or the reason they had been on that part of the path at that time, or the reason the specific architecture of his grief required a cause, and I was the available cause. I was 8 years old, and I had been curious, and I had taken a path that was too difficult for me, and my parents had died trying to find me. He was not wrong about the sequence of events. He was not right about what the sequence of events meant. But grief does not ask for accuracy. Grief asks for someone to blame and takes what is available. Part 4, the years. We moved to our uncle and aunt's house in Calois, north of Lyon, after the deaths. My uncle was my father's brother, a quiet man who worked in civil engineering and who managed the absorption of 2 children into his household with the steady competence of someone who does what needs to be done. My Aunt Helene was the one who gave me the specific quality of warmth in those years. A small and precise woman who had always wanted more children than she had, and who expressed this through the particular domestic attention of someone filling a need that had been waiting. She made soup in winter and braided my hair, and taught me to fold dumplings at New Year. She called me mon petit chou, which is what French adults call children they love. She was the closest thing to a mother I had in those years, and the closest thing I would ever have. Etienne was in the house, but he was not in it. He occupied the space of his bedroom, and the space of his meals, and the space of his school, and he was present in none of them in the way of someone who is genuinely present. He was managing something enormous, and the management required all of his available resources. When he looked at me, which he did as rarely as possible, it was with the specific look of someone who is making an effort not to be where their natural movement would take them. He did not hit me. He did not curse at me. He did not do any of the things that would have been legible as cruelty to the adults in the house. He simply made it clear, through the accumulation of 1,000 small decisions, that I did not belong in his field of vision. I tried. This is the thing I want to be clear about. I tried for 15 years, and the trying was the specific and exhausting trying of a person who loves someone who does not want them and who cannot stop, because the loving is not conditional on being received. I tried in the specific ways available to a child, and then to a teenager, and then to a young adult. I learned to cook because Etienne had liked the soup my mother made. I made his favorite food on his birthday every year from the time I was 10. I left it outside his door and knocked and went away so he did not have to interact with me to receive it. I learned to braid my own hair because he would not be in the room when Helene braided it after a certain age, and I did not want to trouble Helene with this every morning. I worked at school until my grades were in every subject in the top 3 of my class, not because anyone required this of me, because I thought with the specific, magical thinking of a child who has decided that love is something you earn, that being good enough at enough things would eventually produce in him the response I needed. None of it produced the response I needed. The soup was not eaten. The grades were not acknowledged. The space between us was maintained with the specific discipline of a person who has decided where the boundary is and is not going to allow any renegotiation. I moved to Paris for university when I was 18. Physics and mathematics. I was good at the abstract systems of the world in the way that I had been good at everything, the specific focus of someone who has organized their intelligence as a strategy for being noticed. The focus served me well in the abstract systems, and I was genuinely good at them rather than simply performed good, which is different and better. I called Etienne 3 times in the 4 years of my university degree. Each call was one of the worst experiences of my adult life. Not because he was violent, because he was specific. He had a way of identifying the exact words that would land with the maximum precision in the exact location of my most available wound. And he used this ability not with the heat of someone who is angry, but with the cool efficiency of someone who is making a point. I stopped calling. I watched him from a distance through his work accounts and through whatever was publicly available. The way you watch something you love that you cannot touch. I graduated. I got a job at a research institute in Grenoble. I was 22 years old, and I had decided, with the specific finality of a decision that has been a long time arriving, that I was not going to keep trying, that the trying had cost too much and had produced nothing, and that the remaining portion of my life deserved to be spent on something more productive than the maintenance of a love that had no recipient. I did not stop loving him, I just stopped showing it. And then Helene got sick, and I went to Lyon and the mountain. Part 5, Helene. Helene was diagnosed with a form of cancer that required treatment she could not receive in Caluire, and which would keep her in the hospital in Lyon for 3 months. This was in November of my 23rd year. My uncle contacted me because he was managing the practical situation and needed help with certain logistics that his own work schedule could not accommodate. I came. I did not contact Etienne. I communicated with my uncle directly, and I arranged my work schedule to allow for 3 days a week in Lyon, and I managed the specific things that needed managing. The coordination with the hospital and the paperwork and the occasions when Helene needed someone to be with her who was not her husband, because her husband was frightened, and his fear made her more frightened. I sat with Helene. I held her hand, and I talked about small things, the things she had always talked about, the garden and the soup and the specific quality of the light in their kitchen in the morning. I braided her hair when she had enough left to braid, and when she did not, I sat beside her without needing to fill the space. She said to me one afternoon in December, when the hospital room had the specific quality of a December afternoon, in a building that is not outdoors, a flat and honest light, "Margot, you know he loves you." I said, "I know he thinks he does not." She said, "That is not the same thing." I said, "I know, but it is what I have to work with." She said, "When you were small, the first years after your parents, he used to come into your room at night when you had nightmares. You do not remember because you were asleep. He would sit in the chair until you were settled and then go back to his room." I looked at her. She said, "He never told you because he did not want you to know. He had already decided by then what you were to him. But the body does not always follow the decisions of the mind." I said, "Helene." She said, "I am not telling you this to make you forgive him. I am telling you this because you deserve to know that the person who decided to hate you was not the whole of him." I held her hand for a long time. She said, "He will not be able to manage it when he understands what happened. He does not know how to carry things that break the narrative he has built. You need to know this. Whatever happens." I said, "Whatever happens?" She said, "Yes." I did not know on that afternoon in December what she meant. I understood it later from the other side of the mountain. Part 6, The Woman. Her name was Chloe Marchand. She had been in Etienne's life for 3 years in the position that certain people occupy in the lives of people who have organized themselves around emotional unavailability. The specific position of someone who has been allowed inside the perimeter because the perimeter does not apply to them. He loved her in the way he was capable of loving, which was real and also limited by the architecture of a man who had made himself this way for specific reasons. She was 28. She was warm and clever, and she had the specific quality of someone who does not need to be the center of a room, but who changes the quality of the room by being in it. I had met her once briefly when I came to Lyon for a mutual acquaintances event 2 years before the mountain. She had said hello and looked at me with the genuine openness of someone who has not been told what to think. Etienne had told her, not everything, not in the way he never told everything, but enough. Enough that she looked at me the way people look at someone they have been warned about, the specific suspension of natural warmth while the warning is processed. I watched her from the in-between in the weeks after my death. I watched her come to the apartment where Etienne lived, and I watched her sit with him in the specific way of someone who is trying to reach a person who is not reachable, who has gone somewhere interior that does not have an accessible entrance. He was going through the files on the 7th victim. He was doing the work. He was doing the work with the focused efficiency that was his mechanism for everything, the management of unbearable things through the activity of a task. She said one evening, "Etienne, look at me." He looked at her. His face when he looked at her was the face of someone who is performing, looking, rather than actually seeing. She said, "I am afraid for you." He said, "I am fine." She said, "You are not fine. You have not eaten in 2 days. You have not slept. You are putting everything into the case, because if you stop working, you will have to feel what you are not feeling." He said, "I need to find who did this." She said, "I know, and you will, but you are not the only person who can find it. You are the only person who can be you." He looked at her. She said, "I need you to be here." He said, "I am here." She said, "No, You are somewhere else. You have been somewhere else since the case came in, and I think I know why, and I think you know why. He said nothing. She said, Etienne, I have to ask you something. He said, ask it. She said, the victim, the seventh, is it possible it is someone you know? He stood very still. She said, the age, the physical description in the preliminary report, the timing. He turned away. She said, you have not told me anything about your sister in 3 years. He said, there is nothing to tell. She said, that is not true. The specific way you do not tell me things about her tells me a great deal. He said, Chloe. She said, I know you do not speak. I know the history. I know what you believe. But Etienne, if this case is what I think it is, you need to step back from it. You cannot be objective. He said, I am always objective. She said, not about this. He put on his coat and went out. She sat in the apartment for a long time after, in the specific still quality of someone holding something very large and not knowing what to do with it. I watched her, and I thought she is right. She has been right about him from the beginning, in the specific way of people who love someone carefully and with their eyes open. I could not tell her so. Part 7, the evidence. On the day Etienne understood I was in the room, I am in all the rooms. I follow him the way I have always followed him in some form, at a distance watching, trying to be close to something that does not want to be close to me. In death, as in life, this is the shape of my relation to my brother. The identification came through dental records. The specific formal mechanism of forensic identification, the comparison of ante-mortem dental records with the physical evidence produces a result that is not ambiguous. There is no room in the mechanism for the hope that it might be wrong. The mechanism says what it says. Uncle Arno had reported me missing 7 days after I was last seen. This was because I had told him, before I went to the mountain, that I would be away for a week hiking. I had not told him specifically where. This was not unusual for me. I hiked alone regularly. I was experienced and careful. I had gone to Chamonix, not for the hiking specifically. The man who killed me had been at the same hostel where I was staying. He had introduced himself and been friendly, and I had been alone, and the loneliness of the holiday period had made me accept a companion for a section of the trail that I would not normally have accepted a companion for. This is the specific vulnerability of December in the mountains, the specific quality of the period when everyone else is with their families, and the person alone is visible in their aloneness. The investigation that followed was a separate story, the story of the case and the killer, and the systematic and patient work of finding what had been done to 7 people over 18 months. That story is not mine to tell. It belongs to the investigation, and to the investigators, and to the formal mechanisms of justice. What is mine to tell is the moment when Etienne understood. He was in the examination room. The identification had come through overnight, and the report was on his desk when he came in at 6 in the morning. He sat at his desk, and he read the report. I watched him read it. He read it once. He set it down. He sat for approximately 30 seconds. Then he picked it up and read it again. The quality of his face during the reading of the second time was something I have no adequate language for. It was the face of a person receiving a thing that reorganizes every other thing they have ever held. The specific, catastrophic rearrangement of an understanding of the world. He said nothing. He did not make a sound. He stood up very carefully and walked to the window of his office that faced the river, and he stood there for a long time with his hands at his sides. Uncle Arno was at the office by 7. He had been called by the team managing the case, who understood that the identification had produced a complication that required the family contact to be notified carefully. Arno was not told by the team. He arrived and he saw Etienne standing at the window, and he understood. He said, Etienne. Etienne said, yes. Arno said, I know. Etienne said, I should have been the one to identify her. I know her. I should have. Arnaud said nothing. Etienne said, "When was she last seen?" Arnaud said the date. Etienne said, "She called me that night. New Year's Eve, she called me." Arnaud said, "I know." Etienne said, "I told her." Arnaud waited. Etienne said the words he had said. He said them precisely in the same flat tone he had used to say them. He said them to the window and to the river and to Arnaud and to whatever remained of the person they were about. I was in the room. I heard him say the words again. Arnaud said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "Come away from the window." Etienne came away from the window. He sat in the chair at his desk. He was very still. He had the quality of someone who has just been shown the full cost of a decision they made and who is doing the specific and terrible arithmetic. Part 8, The Killer and the Truth. I want to tell you about the killer because the killer is the mechanism by which my brother understood the second thing, and the second thing is the center of this story. His name was Benoit Saunier. He was 46 years old, and he had been a logistics manager at a distribution company in the Ain department, a competent and unremarkable professional life for 20 years until the investigation into his company that resulted in his fraudulent dismissal and the beginning of the systematic planning of what followed. He had organized the deaths of 7 people over 18 months with the patience and precision of someone who had made a decision and was implementing it methodically. The decision was connected to the investigation that had ended his career and to the people connected to that investigation. My brother was connected to that investigation. He had been the expert witness in the trial that had resulted in Saunier's dismissal, providing the forensic analysis that was one of several elements of the case. He was one of several people Saunier had marked for a specific form of revenge. Saunier had researched Etienne carefully. He had found the family. He had found that Etienne had a younger sister and had calculated that killing the sister would cause the maximum suffering to the brother. He had made one error. He believed from his research that the person Etienne loved most was me. That his research would have shown this about the family is not inexplicable. The available evidence, the formal record of our childhood, the fact of shared parents and shared house and shared history supported the conclusion. What the research could not access was the interior dynamic of a relationship that had been organized around rejection and maintained across every mechanism of communication. Saunier had approached me in December in Chamonix because he had identified me as the person whose death would destroy my brother. He was not wrong about the capacity for destruction. He was wrong about the reason. What he learned eventually in the interrogation room of the Lyon Gendarmerie is that Etienne Renaud had spent 15 years making it explicit that the death of his sister was something he wished for, that the last words he had spoken to her had been an expression of that wish, that his reaction to her death was therefore, according to Saunier's logic, not grief, but satisfaction. He told Etienne this in the interrogation room with the specific pleasure of someone delivering information they believe will produce a particular effect. He was wrong about the effect. Etienne had been sitting across the table from Saunier with the controlled efficiency of someone conducting a professional interview, maintaining the specific professional distance that 20 years of forensic work had trained him to maintain. When Saunier told him what he believed about the effect of my death on Etienne, Etienne did not respond immediately. He sat for a moment. Then he said in a voice that was no longer entirely the professional voice, "You are wrong about what she was to me." Saunier said, "I do not think so." Etienne said, "You are wrong about what I was to her, what she was, who she was." Saunier said, "Your sister called you when she was dying. You told her to die. She died." Etienne said, "Yes." Saunier said, "She called you because she loved you. You told her to die because you hated her. And she died. That is the story." Etienne said, "No." Saunier said, "Then tell me what the story is." Etienne looked at the table. He said in the specific low voice of someone who is saying something they have been refusing to say for a long time and who has run out of the refusal. The story is that my sister spent 15 years trying to be what I needed. And I spent 15 years refusing to let her, because I needed her to be the cause of what I could not survive blaming myself for. Sonia said nothing. Etienne said, and she called me when she was dying. And the last thing she heard from me was what she had been hearing from me her entire life. And she said, "Happy New Year." He was quiet. He said, "That is the story." I was in the room. I heard him say it. I watched what his face did as he said it. Part 9, the collapse. What happened to Etienne in the weeks after the interrogation is something I watched with the specific anguish of a person who cannot intervene. He had been performing for 20 years the performance of a man who has organized himself around a specific understanding of a specific event, and the understanding had been dismantled. Not immediately, not cleanly. In the way that things which have been structural for a long time are dismantled, with the specific violence of a load-bearing element being removed. He stopped eating. Chloe brought food and he did not eat it. He stopped sleeping in any sustained way. He went to work because the work was the thing that had always held him, and for a period of 2 weeks, the work held him still, the specific, focused efficiency of solving the case, the methodical assembly of the evidence, the preparation of the documentation that would send Saunier to the appropriate conclusion. Then the case was closed. The work was done. The thing that had held him was no longer holding. Uncle Arnaud came to the apartment. He came with Aunt Helene, who had been discharged from the hospital 2 weeks earlier, still in treatment, but able to be home small and steady and moving through the world, with the specific authority of someone who has recently been very close to not moving through it and has chosen to be grateful for the movement. She sat beside Etienne on the sofa. She did not speak for a long time. Then she said, "Margot loved you more than she loved herself. I want you to hear this, and I want you to not say anything in response for 1 full minute. Just hear it." He looked at his hands. She said, "She made you food every birthday from the time she was 10. She left it outside your door, so you did not have to see her. She graduated at the top of her class at every stage of her education, and she did not tell you because she knew you would say something terrible. She went to Lyon to help me when I got sick, and she did not contact you because she did not want to disturb your life. She called you when she was dying because you were the person she would always call, regardless of what you had said, because that is the specific quality of the love she had for you." Etienne said, "Helene." She said, "I am not finished." He was quiet. She said, "She also knew because I told her that you used to sit in her room at night when she had nightmares. When she was a little girl and she could not sleep, you would come and sit in the chair until she was calm. You never told her. You had already decided what she was going to be to you, and you could not let that be complicated. But you came anyway, because the body does not always follow the decisions of the mind." He looked at the ceiling. She said she died knowing that. I told her in December. She died knowing that underneath the 15 years of it, the person she had been calling her whole life was also the person who used to sit in the dark. So she was not alone. The ceiling. Then he put his face in his hands and he made a sound. I will not describe the sound because some things do not require description. I will say that it was a sound I had never heard from him before, in any of the years of watching him, and that it had in it everything that 15 years of maintained performance had been keeping back. Helene and Arnaud stayed. They stayed through the rest of the day and the evening, and they did not say very much. They simply stayed. And Chloe came in the evening, and she stayed too, and the apartment that had been a very lonely place for a long time was for that night full. I was in the room. I was in all the rooms. Part 10, New Year's Eve. It was the New Year before Saunier died. He died in the prison hospital of the illness that had been progressing throughout his time in custody. The illness he had known about when he began the killings, which had been part of the calculation, the specific logic of a dying man who has decided that the remaining time is sufficient for a specific purpose. When he died, I felt the thing change. Not dramatically, not with the sound of a door opening or anything that the living use as a metaphor for this kind of transition. Simply a quality shift. The specific quality of the in-between had been tightening for weeks, the way the picture narrows at the edges when you are very tired. And when Saunier died, the narrowing stopped narrowing and became something else. It was New Year's Eve. I was in Etienne's apartment. He had been out in the evening and had come back around midnight, and he was standing at the window that faced the street, the one where the fireworks from the square below made the specific coloured light that New Year's Eve makes in Lyon. He was not watching the fireworks. He was looking at a spot in the room near the window where I was standing. He cannot see me. I have not in this year of being near him had any evidence that he can see me. But he was looking at the spot where I was standing with the specific quality of attention that he gave to things that mattered, the full quality, the kind that does not look away. He said to the room, to the spot where I was, to whatever remained in that space of Margot Renault, Happy New Year, Margot. He said it in a voice I had not heard from him in 15 years, the voice of a 16-year-old, sitting in a chair in the dark, beside his sister's bed, the voice that had been there before, the decision that covered it. The tightening that had been happening for weeks completed itself. The room was warm with the New Year's Eve light. The fireworks made their colours outside. Etienne stood at the window, and his mouth moved with something else, something I could not hear any longer, because I was already going the thread that had held me in this place finally coming to its end. The last thing I saw was his face. It had, for the first time in a very long time, the specific quality of someone who is not managing anything. Simply standing in a room, in the New Year's Eve light, with the face of someone who has finally stopped. I had wanted this for 15 years. I carried it with me. I went. Epilogue: what remained. This is told now in the third person because Margot is no longer here to tell it in the first. And because what happened after her going belongs to the living and should be told by someone who can verify it from the inside. Etienne Renault went back to work in February. He requested a reassignment from the Forensic Identification Unit to a different section, which was granted without comment by a director who understood that the specific requirements of the past year had produced a specific and legitimate need for distance from certain categories of work. He kept a photograph of Margot on his desk. Not a formal photograph, not one from a ceremony or an occasion. A photograph that Aunt Helene had found in the box of things from the apartment in Grenoble, taken on a hiking trail somewhere in the Beldon range the summer before she died. She is looking at the camera with the specific quality of someone who is genuinely happy in that moment. The specific, clear happiness of a person on a mountain. They have climbed under their own power with the specific view in front of them that they came to see. She is 22. She is wearing a bright blue jacket. Her hair is loose from whatever she had tied it in. She is looking at the camera as though the person holding the camera is someone she is glad to be with. No one knows who took the photograph. It was on her phone, and the phone was in her bag, and the bag was recovered with the rest of her effects. Etienne does not know who took it. He has the photograph because Elaine gave it to him, and because it shows something he had not allowed himself to see when he could have. He visits the grave. This is not remarkable in itself. He visits it specifically on New Year's Eve and on her birthday, and on the anniversary of the day their parents died. These are the dates that mark the shape of their shared history, the days around which everything is arranged. And he visits with the specific regularity of someone who has decided that this is one of the things he is going to do consistently and has not revisited that decision. Chloe is there sometimes. Not always. She understands that some of the visits need to be only him. He does not speak at the grave usually. He stands. He brings flowers, always the same flowers, the small white ones that grow along the hiking paths in the Chartreuse Massif. The ones that Margot had once told Helene she found specifically beautiful because they were small and grew in difficult conditions and did not require anyone to notice them, to continue. Helene told him this. He brings them. Uncle Arnaud is older and slower. He comes to Lyon for Sunday dinners now and then, and sometimes Etienne cooks badly, the specific badly of someone who did not learn to cook until late and who applies genuine effort but has not yet developed the intuition. He does not cook Margot's recipes. Not yet. Helene says he will eventually. She is patient about the eventually. Chloe moved in with Etienne in the spring. This was not dramatic or announced. It was the specific, natural conclusion of a period in which two people have been through something very large together and have arrived on the other side knowing each other better than they did before. She keeps the photograph company on the desk, in the sense that she does not suggest it be put away or moved to a less visible place. She looks at it sometimes in the mornings when she is at the desk for something else, and she has said to Etienne that she thinks she would have liked Margot. He said without hesitation, the way he says things when they are true, and he has stopped finding reasons not to say them. She would have liked you too. The grave in the Cimetière de Loyasse has a stone now simple and clean, with her name and dates, and a line from something she had written in a journal that Helene found in the box from Grenoble. The line is, "I kept trying because the trying was real, even if the arriving was not." Helene chose it. Etienne read it and was quiet for a long time. He said that was her. Helene said yes, that was exactly her. The stone is in the part of the cemetery that faces south, which catches the afternoon light in a way that makes it seem in the specific quality of Lyon light in late afternoon that the stone is briefly warm. It is not warm, but it looks warm, and the looking is something. He goes on New Year's Eve. He says Happy New Year. He says it in the voice she would have wanted, the one from before the decision, the one that had been there all along, underneath everything, waiting for the performance to end. She is not there to hear it, but she heard it once at the end, and it was enough. It was exactly enough. And, after I die, Will You Be Happy is an original dramatic narrative set in Lyon, France and the surrounding region. All characters, events, and institutions depicted herein are entirely fictional. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to actual organizations or events is entirely coincidental. Additional chapter, The Chair in the Dark. I want to tell you about the nights. Helene told me in December in the hospital room that Etienne used to come to my room when I had nightmares. I was too young to remember this, and he had never told me, and the knowledge arrived as something that I received in the specific way of a gift that comes too late to be used in the way gifts are supposed to be used, but that is nonetheless real and cannot be returned. I thought about it for weeks after she told me. In the days before the mountain, when I was still in Lyon, managing the hospital logistics and the practical things, I thought about what it meant. Not as evidence of love exactly, or not only as that, as evidence of something more specific. The 8-year-old boy who had lost his parents and had decided that his sister was the cause. The same 8-year-old boy who had come to his sister's room at night so she would not be alone in her nightmares. Both things were true simultaneously. This is the thing about people who love and hate the same person, which is more common than the language we have for it suggests. The love and the hate are not opposites. They do not cancel each other out. They live together in the same space, in the same person, the way two things can occupy the same space in physics, under specific conditions. The hate was real. The hate caused real harm over 15 years. And the love was also real, running underneath the hate, in the form of a boy sitting in a dark room until his sister's breathing steadied. He never told me. He protected me from knowing because, to know, it would have complicated his performance, and the performance was the thing he was using to survive. I understand this. The specific logic of a person who has organized their survival around a particular story, and who cannot allow the story to have footnotes, because footnotes become chapters, and chapters become a different story. I do not blame him for not telling me. I want to be clear about this, as I have been clear about other things. What he did to me for 15 years was wrong, and it caused me real harm, and the harm was not reversed by the chair in the dark, But the chair in the dark was also real, and the truth of what I am is not the full truth without it. In the in-between, in the months of being near him after my death, I watched him sleep sometimes. Not in a disturbing way. The watching of someone who has spent their whole life at a distance from a person and is now in the specific position of being able to be close without the closeness costing anything, because nothing costs anything from this side. He slept badly. This was not new. He had always slept badly, which I had known from the years of the shared house in Kailua, the specific quality of a person who does not rest easily and who wakes in the night with the particular alertness of someone whose mind does not fully trust the pause. On the nights when it was bad, Chloe would reach for him, and he would put her hand away, not unkindly, with the specific firmness of someone who needs to manage the waking alone. He would sit up, and he would be still for a while, and then he would go to the kitchen and make tea and stand at the kitchen window looking at the street. I sat at the kitchen table during these nights, not close. The specific distance of someone who is present, without intruding. He could not see me. He looked at the street and drank his tea, and after a while he went back to bed. I thought this is what the chair in the dark looked like from the inside. The person managing the dark so someone else does not have to. The person who is awake so another person can sleep. I was awake because I was dead and had no alternative. He was awake because he could not sleep. We were in the kitchen together. I took what was there. Additional Chapter 3, Calls. I said I called Etienne 3 times during university. I want to tell you about these calls fully because they contain the most concentrated version of what 15 years of loving him felt like. And the full account belongs here. The first call was in the second year of my degree. I had passed the national level B2 certification in English with a score in the top 10% of all candidates that year. I had been studying independently for 8 months, using library resources and online materials and the specific focused attention. I had been applying to everything since I was old enough to understand that doing things well was the only form of self-worth I had reliable access to. I borrowed a phone from my dormitory roommate. Not my own phone because he had blocked every number he had associated with me, but a number he would not recognize. He answered. I said, Etienne, it is Margot. I passed the English certification. I wanted to tell you. The silence on his end lasted approximately 2 seconds. Then he said, Chloe failed her exam this week. You are calling to rub it in. I said I did not know that. He said, you always know everything that matters to her. You find these moments on purpose. I said I did not know. He said, then next time, check before you call to announce your achievements to someone who does not want to hear them. He hung up. I sat on the edge of my roommate's bed for a long time. My roommate, who had been kind enough to lend the phone and tactful enough to be elsewhere in the room, came back to find me sitting there and said nothing. The specific tact of someone who has understood that something has happened and that the appropriate response is to simply be present. The second call was his birthday. I had been told his birthday was not a good time to call. I had been told this many times by him, by his absence, by the specific and consistent quality of what happened every year when his birthday came, and I tried to make contact. But I was 20, and it was his 28th birthday, and I had bought with specific and careful thought a book I believed he would find interesting, a monograph on forensic anthropology that had been recently published and that I had read and found specifically good. I had addressed and packaged it and put a card inside with a message that I had edited 11 times before settling on something that said simply, I found this and thought of you. Happy birthday. I waited a week after his birthday to see if there would be any acknowledgement of the package. There was not. Then I called. He said, I know why you are calling. I said, happy birthday. He said, my birthday wish this year is the same as every year. I wish you would disappear. I said nothing. He said, you sent a book. Send me nothing. Do not contact me on my birthday. Do not contact me at all. Whatever you think we have, because we share parents who are dead, we do not have it. I said, I know, I am sorry. He said, stop being sorry, stop calling, stop sending things, stop existing in my vicinity. He hung up. I looked at the phone for a while, then I put it down, and I made tea, and I sat in the kitchen of my student apartment in Paris in the grey light of November, and I thought about what I was doing and whether it was working and why I kept doing it. I knew why I kept doing it. I kept doing it because the alternative was to stop, and stopping meant accepting conclusion that I was not willing to accept. The conclusion that the person who used to come to my room in the night had decided finally and permanently that I was not someone he needed to come to rooms for, that the 15 years of it were not a temporary configuration that would eventually resolve but the actual and permanent shape of things. I was not willing to accept this. I am not certain this was wisdom, but it was what I had. The third call was from the mountain. This one I have already told you. 3 calls in 4 years. 3 attempts to be heard by someone who had decided not to hear. The quality of the trying was real. The quality of the being blocked was also real. Both things were true. He said in the interrogation room with Sonia, she called me because she loved me, regardless of what I had said, because that is the specific quality of the love she had for me. Yes, that was the specific quality. I carried it to the end. Additional chapter Chloe. I want to say something about Chloe that belongs to her specifically. She had been told things about me that were not true. Not in the way that lies are not true with the explicit intention of deceiving. In the way that a person's account of someone they have decided to hate is always incomplete, always shaped by the requirements of the hatred, rather than by the actual person. Etienne had told her the version of me that served his understanding, and she had received it with the specific generosity of someone who trusts the person she loves, and who does not require corroboration for information that is offered sincerely. She met me once, briefly. She was correct in her assessment that something was wrong, because she is the kind of person who notices when people's social behavior is the behavior of someone managing a situation, rather than simply being in it. She did not act on this because it was not her place to, and because the only person who had standing to change the dynamic was the person who had created it. When she asked Etienne whether the 7th victim might be someone he knew, she was being the specific kind of person she was, the person who asked the difficult question, because not asking it would have required a form of willful not seeing that was not available to her. She paid a specific cost for asking it. He left the apartment and did not come back for 4 hours. And when he came back, he did not answer the question. He answered it eventually to himself in the examination room with the report in his hands, and then he answered it in the interrogation room with Sonia, and then he answered it to Helene and Arnaud, and eventually to Chloe, sitting in the kitchen of the apartment, in the specific direct way he had when he had decided to say something and was no longer managing the decision. She said when he told her, I know. He said, you knew before I did. She said, I suspected. I did not know. He said, why did you not say more? She said, because it was yours to know when you were ready to know it. I can ask the question. I cannot make you hear the answer. That was yours. He looked at her for a long time. He said, Chloe, I need to tell you something about the book I found on my desk 8 years ago. She said, what book? He said, a monograph on forensic anthropology. It was addressed to me, and there was no name on the card. She said, I remember it. He said, Margot sent it. I know because I looked at the order history on the account I had her blocked on. She had ordered it to my address on my birthday. She said, I remember that book. You used it. He said, yes, she had been right about it. She had read it, and she had been right about it. And she sent it, and I did not acknowledge it. And she called a week later, and I told her my birthday wish was for her to disappear. Chloe was quiet. He said, I told you she did not know me. I told you she was a stranger in my life. I used that book. She said, I know. He said, for 3 years I have been telling you a version of her that was not complete. She said, I know that too. He said, how? She said, because the one time I met her, she looked at me with complete openness. She had no reason to be open with me. You had told her what you thought of her, and she knew who I was to you. She looked at me anyway, as though I might be someone worth knowing. He said, yes, that was her. She said, I wish I had known her more. He said, so do I. I was in the kitchen when this conversation happened. I watched it with the specific feeling I had been having for months. The feeling of a person watching something that should have happened earlier and is happening now and cannot be made to have happened earlier, which is its own form of grief, but is also its own form of gratitude. It is happening. Even if it is now, it is happening. That is the thing I want to say about Chloe. Not a dramatic thing, only this: she saw me once for a moment, with the specific openness of someone who has not been told what to think. And that seeing was real, even though I did not know it at the time, and it makes a difference from here to know it happened. Additional chapter, The Dumplings. It is Chinese New Year in the hospital memory that Helene described to me in December. The small girl who ran into the kitchen to wash the dishes. The braids, the dumplings. I learned to fold dumplings from Helene when I was 9 years old. She had learned from a colleague of my uncle's, a woman from Wenzhou who had been in their circle for years, and who had brought the recipe and the technique and the specific patience for teaching it to whoever wanted to learn. The technique was not complicated, but it required practice, the specific practice of a thing that involves the hands, and that becomes, over enough repetitions, a form of knowledge that lives below the level of thought. I made dumplings every New Year for Etienne from the time I was 10. I made them at Helene's house in the kitchen when he was elsewhere in the house, and I left them in the specific container that she kept for them. The pale blue ceramic container with the lid that needed to be pushed down on one side to close properly. He ate them. He never said so, and he never thanked me. But the container was always empty by the following morning. I knew this because I checked. I was 10 and 11 and 12, and I checked every year whether the container was empty, because the emptiness was the closest thing I had to acknowledgement, and I took it the way you take what is available. I do not know if he knew I had made them. He may have believed they were Helene's. He may have known they were mine and eaten them anyway, in the dark of the kitchen, at some hour when no one would see him eating something that I had made. Both things are possible. After my death, Helene told him about the dumplings. She told him specifically, with the details. She knew the years and the ceramic container and the checking of the emptiness. She told him because she believed he needed to know, and she told him in the hospital the week she was discharged, sitting in the room with the afternoon light on the wall, the recovery light. He said, I thought they were yours. She said, I know you did. He said I would not have eaten them if I had known. She said, I know that too. He was quiet. She said, but you ate them every year. For 13 years you ate dumplings that she made because she thought they might please you, even when she was 15 and 17 and 20, and it would have been entirely reasonable for her to stop. He said nothing. She said she stopped after you told her, on her 20th birthday, to disappear. She came back to Lyon the next day, and she sat in the kitchen, and she did not make dumplings that year. She told me she had decided to stop trying. But the following January, she made them again. I asked her why, and she said she had changed her mind. He said, why? Helene said. She said, because if I stop, I have decided something I am not ready to decide. He put his hand over his face. She said she never stopped. This is the thing I want you to know. Not as a bid for retroactive sympathy, or as a demonstration of my virtue. Simply as the true account. I never stopped. Not because I did not want to, because stopping would have required me to decide something about him that I was never willing to decide, and I never found the moment when the not deciding cost more than the trying. It cost a great deal in the ordinary accounting. In the accounting that I do from here, it was worth every year of it. The trying was real, even if the arriving was not. That is what the stone says. That is the whole of it. Additional chapter, The Mountain, before. There are things about the days before the mountain that I want to tell you, because they belong to me and not to him, and because the full account of a person includes the things that happened in their own life that were not organized around someone else. I had been in Grenoble for 14 months. My work at the Research Institute was the specific and absorbing work of someone doing something they are genuinely good at and have found in the doing a form of identity that does not depend on being recognized by anyone else. The Institute worked on seismic analysis, the specific study of how the Earth moves and what the movement tells you about the structure beneath the surface. I was good at the analysis. I had the specific quality for it that my mathematics background gave me the ability to look at data that is complex and find within it the signal that is meaningful rather than the noise that is not. I had a small apartment on the Rue Les Diguieres with a window that faced the Vercors Massif. On clear days, you could see the specific line of the plateau, against the sky the flat top, and the abrupt drop of its western face, the particular mountain geometry of a place that has been shaped by forces over millions of years into something that holds its shape regardless of the weather. I had a friend at the Institute, a postdoctoral researcher named Yan, who had been kind to me in the specific way of someone who notices when another person is alone and decides that this is something they can do something about. He had a wife and a small child, and they had me for dinner sometimes. And the specific quality of being in a house that was genuinely a home was something I had not had for a long time. I went to the mountain in December because the holiday was coming, and the holiday was the specific period when my aloneness was most clearly visible to itself. I had spent every Christmas and New Year alone since university, except for the years when Helene and Arnaud had found a way to include me that did not require Etienne's presence, which had been possible in the first years and had become less possible as the logistics got more complicated. I went to Chamonix because it was beautiful and because I knew the trails and because the specific quality of being in high winter mountains was something that I found genuinely restorative, the way some people find the sea or the city. The mountains had been where my parents died, and I had returned to them anyway, not in spite of this, but I think because of it. Because the mountains held the last version of them that was not the aftermath version. Because going to the mountains was a form of going towards something rather than away. I met Benoit Saunier in the hostel on the second evening. I knew it was the second evening because I had arrived on the first evening too tired to be social and had eaten alone in the hostel restaurant and gone to bed early, and on the second evening I had been in a better state and had sat at the communal table, and he had been sitting there already. He was unremarkable. That is the honest description. Not menacing, not obviously wrong in any way that registered. He was the kind of person you share a table with in a hostel, friendly and interested, and with the specific social competence of someone who has spent time traveling alone and knows how to put another solitary traveler at ease. He asked where I was from. I said Lyon, originally now Grenoble. He said he knew Grenoble slightly from a conference several years back. We talked about the city and the institute and the mountains and the specific quality of the winter trails in the Chamonix Valley. He suggested a trail for the following day that he described as not too challenging, but with an excellent view from the upper section. He suggested it in the way of someone sharing local knowledge, helpful and casual. I should have stayed with the trail I had planned. I know this now with the absolute clarity of hindsight and the absolute uselessness of it. The trail I had planned was more heavily travelled and would have had other walkers on it even in December. The trail he suggested was quieter and more isolated, which he described as one of its virtues, and which was, of course, one of its virtues for his purposes. I went to the trail he suggested. I went alone, having arranged to meet him there, because he had said he would be starting at the same point. He was at the starting point when I arrived. The rest of it I have described. I want you to know about the view. The view from the upper section of that trail which I reached before. The thing that happened was the specific view of the Mont Blanc Massif from an angle I had not seen before, the specific quality of the winter morning light on the ice faces the cold blue and white of it, the scale of something that makes you understand standing in front of it, that the world is much larger and much older than the things that are making your life difficult. I stood at the view for 10 minutes. I had my notebook, which I carried on trails, the way other people carry music, something to sit with in the moments when sitting is possible. I wrote 3 sentences about the view. The notebook was in my bag when the bag was found. Etienne has the notebook. Helene told me this. He does not know, I know. The 3 sentences say the massif in morning light. The cold is the honest kind. I am glad I came here. I was glad I came. That is also part of the true account. Additional, chapter Arnaud and the small things. I want to tell you about my uncle Arnaud, who is the person in this story who has spoken the least and done the most. He is 63 years old. He is a quiet man, in the way that men are quiet when they have decided that speaking is a tool for specific purposes and not for general use, and who are genuinely comfortable in silence in a way that many people are not. He worked in civil engineering for 30 years. The specific work of building infrastructure that is useful and reliable and that functions correctly without announcing itself, which is a form of contribution to the world that I find specifically admirable. He had no biological children, which had been a grief of his middle years and which had resolved itself. He told me once, not by the grief disappearing, but by the arrival of something he had not anticipated. The 2 children of his brother suddenly, and without preparation, had become the children he had. He had not asked for this. He had managed it because it needed to be managed and because he was the kind of person who, when things need to be managed, does not require the managing to make sense before he begins. He drove to Lyon every significant date for years. Christmas, Easter, the anniversary of my parents' deaths, my birthday when I was in Lyon. He drove to Grenoble twice when I was at university for reasons he did not explain, beyond saying he was in the area. I had not been in the area. He had driven 2 hours to check that I was all right. And he had taken me for lunch and paid without comment and driven 2 hours back. He is the person who told the gendarmerie I was missing. He had expected me back on a specific day, and I had not arrived, and he had waited 1 additional day in case of a delay that had a normal explanation. And then he had reported. He was 62 years old, a retired civil engineer, standing in a gendarmerie office in Lyon, reporting his niece missing on the day after New Year. He had the specific quality of someone who knows that the procedure is the procedure and does the procedure. When they found me, or what remained of me, he was the one who formally identified me. Not Etienne, who was on the case and who could not be the identifying family member for reasons of procedure and also for reasons that had nothing to do with procedure. Arnaud stood in the identification room and he looked at what was there and he said the necessary words and he signed the necessary forms. Then he went outside and he sat on a bench in the January cold for 20 minutes. He told me this later, in the way that people tell things to the dead when they are in a place where the telling feels possible. He was at the grave on the anniversary, the first anniversary, and Helene was beside him, and he said it to the stone, in the specific, matter-of-fact way. He said everything. He said I sat on the bench for 20 minutes. I did not cry. I could not at that point. But I sat there and I thought about the way you used to run to the kitchen to wash the dishes, even as a small child. How Helene used to say you knew how to disappear into usefulness before anyone had taught you. How you used to check whether the dumplings were gone. He stopped. He said I knew about the dumplings. Helene told me. I never told Etienne. I thought there might come a time when it would be the right thing to tell him. I was wrong about when, but I was right that the time would come. He was quiet for a while. He said, I am not going to say the things that people say at graves. You know them. You heard enough of them while you were alive. I am just going to say that you were a good person and that I am glad you were in our family and that the specific way you were in our family quietly and persistently and without requiring anything back was a gift I did not tell you about often enough. I am telling you now. He stood up. Helene took his arm. They walk through the cemetery in the afternoon light, the specific light that falls on the southern part of the Cimetière de Loyasse in late afternoon, the warm light. I was there. I was there the way I am always there when the people I love are in places that matter. It was enough. Additional chapter, what I know now. The thing about being dead is that you eventually stop organizing your understanding around the living person's questions. The living person's questions are, what does this mean? What caused this? Who is to blame? What should have been different? These are useful questions for the living, because the living can act on the answers. I cannot act on the answers. I have only the answers themselves. What I know now is this. My brother loved me. He organized a great deal of himself against this love, because the love was complicated by the fact that it was also a grief, and a grief that he had chosen to manage through blame, and the blame had worked well enough for long enough that dismantling it required something as large as what happened to dismantle it. He was also wrong, not in the complicated way that people are wrong when they are doing their best in difficult circumstances, in the clear way that a person is wrong when they are using another person as a vessel for something that does not belong in that vessel. What I carried for 15 years was not mine to carry. The deaths of our parents were not mine. The grief for them was not mine to absorb. The specific toll that grief took on him was not mine to pay. I paid it anyway, because I loved him and because I did not understand for a very long time the difference between loving someone and accepting the cost of loving someone that is beyond what love should cost. I understand it now. It is too late to be useful, and it is true. I also know the trying was worth it. Not because it produced the result I wanted while I was alive. It produced nothing while I was alive except the dumplings eaten in the dark by someone who could not acknowledge eating them, and the chair in the dark that I did not know about until it was almost too late. It did not produce reconciliation or acknowledgement or the single honest conversation that I wanted more than almost anything. But the trying was real. Every birthday and every phone call and every time I made the dumplings and every time I checked whether the container was empty, these things were real and they were mine, and they constituted a form of love that did not require reciprocation to be love. And they are on the record. He has the notebook, he has the photograph, he has Helene's account of the dumplings and Arno sitting on the bench. He has the trying documented on the record available to him now that he is able to receive it. I could not make him receive it while I was alive. It arrived after I was gone, which is not the order I would have chosen, and which is the order that was available. The trying was real even if the arriving was not. Yes, even so. Yes.